Hello and welcome to the Adventure Toolkit example reel number 14. My name is Glenn Storm and I'm from Hot Iron Productions. Today we're going to look at tools from the Scene folder, starting with the Options Manager. The Options Manager tool is designed to manage custom options in each scene at scene load. This works with other managers, namely the Menu Manager that we looked at in a previous example of interaction tools, and the Scene Manager, which we will look at next. Let's look at the properties on the Options Manager. There is only one. It's an array called Options, and in this example I only have one custom option I would like to work with. It's called Arrow White. Let's look at the properties of each options item. First is the options label. This option label must match the label of the button that will affect this by the user. So on the Menu Manager we have a button called Arrow White. It will toggle to say Arrow Blue, but the default label, the button label, is Arrow White as it's saying here. This option label must also match a control that appears on the Scene Manager, and again we're going to go over that next. The next property is Option Enabled, and this is the currently enabled state of this option. This checkbox will match the currently pressed state of the button as it appears on the Menu Manager for Arrow White. The next property is Option on Destroy, and this is an array of object references. These objects can be destroyed in your scene at scene load if this option is on or enabled. The next property is another array of object references that can be destroyed at scene load if this option is off. It's called Option Off Destroy. For this example, Arrow White, it toggles to say Arrow White, from Arrow White to say Arrow Blue when it is enabled. And when the option is off, as it is now by default, I only want to destroy one thing. I've set it to destroy this trigger here, blue arrow trigger. Blue arrow trigger is simply an event single. It talks to this blue arrow manager and fires a single event immediately upon scene load with no delay. That blue arrow manager simply turns on one object, the material trigger blue arrow. So this custom option is meant to toggle the color of this arrow here. We have used in action tools examples blue. The thing that does that is this material trigger. It turns the blue arrow to this utility blue. But I would only like that material trigger to be activated in the case where we have turned on that option. Okay. By default, we have not turned on the option. It says Arrow White. So, the option is disabled by default at scene load. And at scene load, if by default, if this option is disabled, then I would like to destroy the blue arrow trigger. In other words, the Options Manager will destroy the thing that would in turn turn the arrow blue. Let me say that one more time. We've got an arrow that will turn blue automatically because this blue arrow trigger is set to immediately fire and activate this material trigger and turn it blue. But because this Options Manager is in play, and because by default this option is not enabled, it says Arrow White, I have set our Options Manager to destroy the blue arrow trigger, so it never fires and the material trigger is never turned on, and if we run our scene with the Menu Manager on, the blue arrow trigger is immediately removed and that material trigger never turns on. So if we do, excuse me, we just went to the other scene. If we do turn that option on, we turn it from Arrow White to Arrow Blue, and we go to the other scene because this happens again, Options Manager works on scene load. We will now see the arrow turn blue because we have asked our Options Manager to consider whether or not this option is enabled, and in this case we can see that it is. And option on destroy has nothing to destroy, so the blue arrow trigger was in play. It asked the blue arrow manager to turn on our material trigger, and the material trigger turned it blue. This again is the only way to affect custom options that you can dream up in your trigger systems. You can devise ways of manipulating your trigger system at scene load with the options manager and effectively manage custom options. That's the options manager. Next is the scene manager. The scene manager tool is designed to send your users to other scenes. It also manages other managers, and we've gone over all of them by now. Let's go over the properties of the scene manager. First is a property called menu. This is a reference to the menu manager in your scene, and as described earlier, we have gone over that in a example reel on interaction tools. This is the reference of that menu manager we use. The next property is an array of controls, and as I just mentioned, there are an array of controls that must match those options in the options manager, like for our arrow white for custom options. But all of these controls must match all of the buttons that we have in our buttons array in the menu manager. So we have next scene, arrow white, and sound effects on for our buttons on our menu manager, so we have to have next scene, arrow white, and sound effects on controls in our scene manager in order for everything to hook up. Let's look at the properties on each controls item. First is the button label. Again, this matches the label of the button as it appears when it is not pressed on the menu manager. Next is button pressed, and this is again managed by your user at runtime, and it's done through the menu manager. The menu manager talks to the scene manager and lets it know whether this control is pressed or not. The next property is button action. This is the action that the button will take, and in this case, next scene is meant to send us to another scene or load a level. There are a number of actions that you can do with buttons. You can toggle them, as we do with our arrow white and arrow blue toggle, or our sound effects on and sound effects off toggle. You can cycle the buttons between more than two labels. You can load a level, or you can quit the game. The next property is a number of button labels that you can cycle through. The property is called label names, and in this example I hypothetically put 3 labels we could put in there, but we actually don't cycle, so I'm not going to let that be populated. The next property is level name, and if you are loading a level, as we are with this button, you can name that here. This is taking a string that will match the name of the scene that you would like to go to. It's important to note that that scene must be loaded in your build settings. In other words, you must have under File, Build Settings, you must have all the scenes that you would like to load in your build settings already in order for this to work. The last property in the controls items is option, and if you would like this button to correspond to an option as opposed to quitting the game or loading a level, then you would indicate which option it would be. And there are 3 standard options. You can toggle sound effects, you can toggle music, or you can toggle captions, and those will be handled with those respective managers. Or you can handle, as we do with our item arrow white, a custom option. So again, we've got next scene, arrow white, and that is a toggleable custom option. And that will be picked up by our options manager that we just went over. So again, we have sound effects on and off. That will toggle the standard option of sound effects. The next property in the scene manager is text state. This is an array of text that is populated automatically, and it's communicated by the menu manager to the scene manager. Essentially, this stores the information from read-only and from input text. So if I hit play, you will see that there is an element here that is representing the one text element we have on the menu, that is the title called menu. And if I actually hit a button and cause our menu to update the scene manager, you'll see that that menu is populated here in this one text item. If we had an input text, for example, and we pressed a button to send the information to the scene manager, the updated text, say it was player 1 and modified by the user to say their name of someone, then the name someone would appear here. The modified text would appear here. Okay. Again, this is so that your custom scripts can read from the scene manager what the user has typed in for input text. The next property on the scene manager is music object. This is a reference to the music manager in your scene. This is so you can toggle music on and off, and it also manages the music manager to travel with us through scenes. Again, we already went over this, and we have it in play here. The next property on the scene manager is Captions Object, and this is a reference to the Captions Manager. Again, we've gone over this in previous examples. That's under the cinematic tools, and this manager handles captions. This scene manager references it so to toggle captions on and off. The last property on the scene manager is loading screen, and this is an optional texture that you can apply that will be shown on the screen as the next scene loads. So if you've got a large scene, we don't in this example, but if you had a large scene that takes a while to load, you can throw a texture on here saying loading or some other interesting graphics that keep your users happy. Okay, that is the scene manager and the options manager, and that is all the time we have for this video, but I urge you to stay tuned for the next video where we continue and complete the tools from the scene folder.